Most books begin by offering answers. This one begins by questioning the question itself. What if the ideas of good and evil, ideas we inherit, repeat, and defend, are not eternal truths at all? What if they are human inventions, shaped by fear, power, habit, and history? Friedrich Nietzsche does not write to comfort you, he writes to wake you up. Beyond Good and Evil, published in 1886, is not a moral guidebook. It is a psychological investigation, a philosophical provocation, and in many ways, a mirror held uncomfortably close to the reader's face. Nietzsche asks us to pause before saying this is good or that is evil, and instead ask a far more unsettling question. Who decided this, and why? For centuries, Western philosophy had been built on the assumption that truth is something pure, stable, and discoverable through reason alone. Plato believed truth existed in a higher realm. Christian morality believed good and evil were divinely ordained. Even modern philosophers believed morality could be grounded in logic or universal laws. Nietzsche challenges all of this. He suggests that behind every philosophy lies a psychology. Behind every moral system lies a human motive, and behind every claim to truth lies a hidden will. According to Nietzsche, philosophers do not discover truth. They create it, often without realizing it. When a philosopher says, "This is how the world truly is," Nietzsche hears something else beneath the words, "This is how I need the world to be." This is why Nietzsche begins Beyond Good and Evil with suspicion. Suspicion of philosophers, suspicion of morality, suspicion even of truth itself. He asks, why do we value truth so highly? Why do we assume truth is always good? Why do we fear illusion, error, and uncertainty? Perhaps Nietzsche suggests life itself depends on illusion. Perhaps some falsehoods are necessary for strength, creativity, and survival. Perhaps the desire for absolute truth is not noble, but fearful. This is not an attack on thinking. It is an attack on unexamined thinking. Nietzsche believes that most moral systems were created not by the strong but by the weak. Not by those who loved life, but by those who suffered under it. He introduces the idea that morality is not universal, it is historical. It grows out of social conditions, power struggles, and emotional needs. Good and evil, he argues, did not fall from the sky. They were born on earth among humans. And humans, Nietzsche reminds us, are not purely rational beings. We are driven by instincts, by desires, by resentment, by fear, by the will to dominate or to survive. This is where Nietzsche introduces one of his most unsettling ideas, the will to power. The will to power is not just the desire to rule others, it is the deeper drive to assert oneself, to grow, to shape the world according to one's inner force. Every philosophy, Nietzsche claims, is an expression of this will, even philosophies that preach humility, self-denial, or obedience. Especially those. Nietzsche argues that traditional morality, particularly Christian morality, glorified weakness. It praised humility, meekness, obedience, and self-sacrifice, not because these traits were strong, but because they protected those who lacked power. Over time, these values became labelled good. Strength, pride, ambition, and independence became labelled evil. Nietzsche does not say suffering people are bad. He says suffering people created a morality that condemned strength because strength frightened them. This is what he calls slave morality. In contrast, Nietzsche describes an earlier form of morality, master morality, where good meant noble, powerful, life-affirming. Evil meant weak, contemptible, or cowardly. The shift from master morality to slave morality, Nietzsche argues, reshaped Western civilization, and most people never realized it happened. This is why Nietzsche writes in short bursts, aphorisms, sharp observations, psychological insights. He is not building a system, he is dismantling one. And he warns the reader early on, this book is not for everyone. Nietzsche believes that most people prefer comfortable lies to uncomfortable truths. They want certainty, rules, clear moral lines. But Nietzsche writes for the few who are willing to stand without guarantees, who can endure ambiguity, who can question even their deepest convictions. He calls these people free spirits. Free spirits do not blindly accept inherited values. They test them, they challenge them, they risk standing alone. Nietzsche knows this path is dangerous. To go beyond good and evil is not to become immoral, it is to become responsible for one's values. And responsibility is heavier than obedience. By the end of this book, Nietzsche does not tell you what to believe. He asks whether you are strong enough to decide for yourself. Nietzsche does not trust philosophers who claim neutrality. In fact, neutrality is exactly what he doubts the most. He argues that no philosopher thinks from a position of pure objectivity. Every philosopher brings their temperament, instincts, fears, and desires into their thinking. Philosophy, Nietzsche says, is not cold logic, it is confession in disguise. When a philosopher praises reason above all else, Nietzsche asks, what are they afraid of? When a philosopher condemns passion, Nietzsche wonders, which passion betrayed them? Nietzsche believes philosophers wear masks. Behind abstract language and complex systems lies a deeply personal struggle. This is why he rejects the idea of a single universal truth. Truth, for Nietzsche, is always interpreted through perspective. There are no facts without interpretation, only viewpoints shaped by power, culture, and psychology. This does not mean everything is meaningless. It means meaning is created, not discovered. Nietzsche criticizes previous philosophers for pretending their values were eternal. He accuses them of smuggling moral assumptions into their theories and then calling those assumptions truth. Even logic itself, Nietzsche suggests, may not be as neutral as we think. Why do we value consistency? Why do we distrust contradiction? Perhaps because inconsistency feels threatening. Perhaps because order feels safer than chaos. Life, Nietzsche reminds us, is not logical. It is overflowing, contradictory and excessive. Philosophy tries to tame life. Nietzsche wants philosophy to serve life instead. This leads him to challenge traditional ideas of the soul, free will, and responsibility. Nietzsche questions the belief in a stable, unified self. He suggests the self is more like a battlefield of competing drives. Thoughts rise not because we choose them, but because certain instincts become stronger than others. Free will, in this sense, is not absolute freedom. It is the feeling that arises when one drive successfully commands the rest. This view removes moral blame, but also moral comfort. If humans are driven by instincts, then moral judgments become psychological judgments. We do not condemn actions because they are evil. We condemn them because they threaten certain values or power structures. Nietzsche also challenges the idea of equality. He does not believe all humans are the same in capacity, strength, or creativity. This is one of the most controversial parts of his philosophy. Nietzsche argues that pretending everyone is equal does not uplift humanity. It flattens it. It discourages excellence. It punishes greatness. It rewards mediocrity. He is not calling for cruelty. He is calling for honesty. Life, Nietzsche insists, thrives on difference, hierarchy, tension, and struggle. Remove these and life becomes stagnant. This is why Nietzsche despises herd mentality. The herd values safety, sameness, and approval. The individual values risk, uniqueness, and self-overcoming. To think independently is lonely. To create values is exhausting. But to obey without thinking is for Nietzsche a kind of living death. Throughout Beyond Good and Evil, Nietzsche returns again and again to one theme. Be suspicious of what feels morally obvious. What feels obvious is often inherited. What is inherited is rarely questioned, and what is rarely questioned quietly controls us. Nietzsche does not want followers, he wants challengers. He writes not to be believed, but to be wrestled with. And perhaps that's his greatest provocation of all. Nietzsche wants you to understand something deeply unsettling. Morality is not discovered, it is created. Most people grow up believing moral rules are timeless, that good has always been good, that evil has always been evil, that right and wrong are written into the fabric of reality itself. Nietzsche calls this belief naive. He argues that morality has a history, and like all histories, it is shaped by conflict, domination, fear, and survival. To understand morality, Nietzsche says, we must stop asking what is good, and instead ask who defined it, and under what conditions. Early human societies did not begin with moral philosophy. They began with power. The strong ruled. The noble decided what mattered. Good meant strength, courage, generosity, pride, and vitality. Bad meant weak, cowardly, low, or contemptible. Notice something important here. In this early form of morality, bad did not mean sinful or immoral. It simply meant lesser. There was no guilt attached, no shame, no moral condemnation. The noble person did not ask whether their actions were morally justified. They acted out of abundance, out of strength overflowing. But history changed. As societies grew more complex, power shifted. Those without physical or political strength could not win through force, so they discovered another weapon, morality. Nietzsche calls this transformation the birth of resentment. Resentment arises when a person feels powerless but cannot express their anger directly. Instead of confronting the source of their suffering, they internalize it. They reinterpret their weakness as virtue. "I am not weak," resentment whispers. "I am morally superior." Through this psychological reversal, humility becomes good, obedience becomes good, patience becomes good, suffering becomes meaningful. Meanwhile, strength becomes arrogance, pride becomes sin, and power becomes cruelty. This is the moral revolution Nietzsche believes shaped Western civilization. The powerless redefined the moral landscape, not by defeating the strong, but by judging them. And the most successful expression of this new morality, Nietzsche argues, was Christianity. Christian morality placed virtue in the afterlife, and it promised justice beyond this world. It taught people to endure suffering now in exchange for salvation later. Nietzsche does not deny the emotional power of this belief, but he questions its cost. What happens to a culture that teaches people to mistrust their instincts, to fear desire, to view strength as sin? According to Nietzsche, such a culture produces guilt-ridden individuals who turn their aggression inward. They punish themselves, they doubt themselves, they seek permission to exist. This is what Nietzsche means when he says morality can become life-denying, not because it encourages kindness, but because it suppresses vitality. Nietzsche is not advocating cruelty or chaos. He is asking whether a morality built on resentment can ever produce greatness. He believes great individuals, artists, thinkers, creators, often stand outside conventional morality, not because they are evil, but because they follow a deeper law, the law of creation. Creation, Nietzsche insists, always involves destruction. Old values must be broken for new ones to emerge. This is why societies fear creators. They are unpredictable. They challenge sacred norms. They refuse obedience. Yet without them, culture stagnates. Nietzsche wants morality to be understood not as divine command, but as a human strategy. A strategy that can be questioned, revised, or replaced. Once morality is seen this way, it loses its absolute authority, and that terrifies people. Because if morality is not absolute, then responsibility falls back on the individual. And most people do not want that responsibility. Nietzsche does something radical. He questions the value of truth itself, not whether truth exists, but whether it should always be pursued at all costs. This is shocking because philosophy, science, and religion all claim truth as their highest ideal. Truth is assumed to be good. Falsehood is assumed to be bad. Nietzsche asks, why? Why do we assume truth is always beneficial to life? Why do we fear illusion so deeply? Perhaps Nietzsche suggests illusion is not the enemy of life, but one of its conditions. Consider art. Art thrives on illusion. It exaggerates, distorts, invents. And yet art often reveals deeper truths about existence than raw facts ever could. Life itself, Nietzsche argues, is not built for objectivity. It is built for survival, growth, and expression. The human mind evolved not to perceive reality accurately, but to perceive it usefully. This means that many of our beliefs, even our most cherished ones, may not be true in any absolute sense. They may simply be necessary. Religion, morality, identity, a purpose. These ideas help humans endure suffering. They provide meaning where none may objectively exist. So Nietzsche asks, is a comforting lie worse than a destructive truth? He does not answer this question directly. Instead, he forces the reader to sit with it. Nietzsche believes that the modern world is entering a dangerous phase. Traditional beliefs are collapsing. God is no longer convincing. Morality feels hollow. Truth has become fragmented. This creates what Nietzsche famously calls nihilism, the feeling that nothing has meaning. But Nietzsche does not see nihilism as the end. He sees it as a transition. The collapse of old values creates space for new ones, but only if individuals are strong enough to endure the absence of certainty. Most people, Nietzsche predicts, will cling to new idols: ideology, nationalism, blind science, mass movements. Anything to avoid facing the abyss. But a few will take another path. They will accept that life has no given meaning, and choose to create meaning anyway. This is the spirit Nietzsche is writing for. Not the believer, not the skeptic, but the creator. The person who can look at chaos without flinching, who can live without guarantees, who can affirm life even with all its suffering. Nietzsche believes that such individuals will shape the future of humanity, not through domination, but through example. They will live as experiments, as living questions. as proof that life does not need moral certainty to be valuable. This is why Beyond Good and Evil is not a conclusion. It is an invitation to step beyond inherited values, beyond comfortable lies, beyond fear-based morality, and into the risky freedom of self-creation. Nietzsche introduces a rare and demanding figure, the free spirit. A free spirit is not someone who rebels loudly, not someone who simply rejects tradition for the sake of rejection. A free spirit is someone who has learned to think without leaning on religion, without leaning on ideology, without leaning on collective approval. This kind of independence, Nietzsche warns, is not liberating in the way people imagine. It is heavy, it is isolating, and it often feels like standing alone in a storm. Most people, Nietzsche says, do not truly want freedom. They want security, they want certainty. They want someone else to tell them what is right, what is wrong, and what their life means. The free spirit refuses this comfort. Instead of asking, "What should I believe?" the free spirit asks, "Why do I believe this?" This question sounds simple, but it is dangerous, because once you begin asking why, inherited beliefs begin to weaken. Custom loses its authority, tradition starts to look arbitrary, and morality begins to feel less sacred and more historical. Nietzsche describes the free spirit as someone who has survived the collapse of their old beliefs, someone who has passed through doubt without becoming cynical, someone who has faced nihilism and not turned away. This is crucial. Many people encounter the collapse of meaning and respond with despair. They conclude that nothing matters. They withdraw, they become passive, and Nietzsche despises this reaction. For him, nihilism is not a final destination. It is a test. The free spirit uses nihilism as a clearing ground. Once old values collapse, space opens for new ones. But creating values is harder than obeying them. It requires judgment, it requires courage, it requires the willingness to make mistakes and take responsibility for them. This is why Nietzsche says, freedom is not a right, it is an achievement. Freedom must be earned through intellectual discipline and emotional strength. The free spirit does not hate morality, they understand it. They see where values came from, what purpose they served, and where they fail. They can adopt values consciously rather than blindly. Nietzsche believes this kind of thinking will become more necessary as traditional beliefs continue to lose credibility. Societies that rely on inherited moral systems without understanding them eventually face collapse. When belief erodes, panic sets in. People rush toward extremes. Nietzsche foresaw this long before it became visible. He understood that when people lose faith in old gods, they do not become rational overnight. They simply replace one absolute with another. The free spirit resists this impulse. They do not rush to fill the void. They remain patient. They experiment. And through experimentation, they slowly shape a personal philosophy grounded in experience rather than dogma. Nietzsche does not claim this path is for everyone. In fact, he insists it is not. Most people need structure. They need rules. They need shared values to function socially. The free spirit accepts this without resentment. They do not try to convert the masses. They focus inward. Freedom for Nietzsche is not about changing the world first. It is about mastering oneself. Section 6. Women, Power, and Misunderstood Provocation. Few parts of Beyond Good and Evil generate as much controversy as Nietzsche's remarks about women. To read them carelessly is to miss their intention. To read them uncritically is to excuse their limits. Nietzsche writes provocatively, deliberately so. He uses exaggeration, irony, and sharp language to unsettle his audience. But beneath the provocation lies a deeper psychological argument about power, perception, and roles. Nietzsche does not believe men and women are moral opposites. He believes they have historically been shaped by different strategies for survival. In societies dominated by male physical power, women often developed indirect forms of influence. Subtlety, persuasion, emotional intelligence, and adaptability. Nietzsche sees these traits not as weaknesses, but as forms of strength developed under constraint. However, he criticizes modern attempts to flatten differences in the name of equality, when those attempts ignore biological, psychological, and historical realities. Nietzsche is not arguing against dignity. He is arguing against simplification. He believes that pretending all differences do not exist leads to resentment and dishonesty. At the same time, Nietzsche is a product of his century. His blind spots are real. Some of his statements reflect cultural limitations rather than philosophical necessity. Nietzsche himself would likely insist that his work be challenged, including his views on gender. What matters more than his conclusions is his method. He forces readers to ask uncomfortable questions. Are power dynamics always obvious? Is influence always direct? Do moral ideals sometimes disguise control? Nietzsche believed that relationships, romantic, social, political, urban, are rarely as innocent as they appear. They involve negotiation, dominance, sacrifice, and desire. This does not make them evil, it makes them human. His deeper warning is against idealization. Whenever we idealize love, morality, gender roles, we stop seeing clearly, and when we stop seeing clearly, manipulation becomes easy. Nietzsche wants clarity, even when clarity is uncomfortable, even when it offends. This is why Beyond Good and Evil feels abrasive. Nietzsche is not trying to please, he is trying to provoke thought, and provocation, when done honestly, is a form of respect. Nietzsche makes a sharp distinction between two kinds of human beings, not between good and evil, but between noble and reactive. The noble type does not ask permission to exist. They do not define themselves by opposition. They act first and reflect later. This does not mean they are reckless or cruel. It means their actions arise from inner abundance rather than inner lack. The noble person says yes to life. They experience themselves as a source of value. Their judgments come from instinct, confidence, and self-trust. They do not constantly look outward for validation. When they call something good, they mean, this expresses strength, fullness, vitality. In contrast, the reactive type lives in response. They define themselves against others. They say no before they say yes. Their values are born not from creation, but from resistance. Nietzsche believes most moral systems that dominate society are reactive. They emerge from fear of the noble type, from resentment toward those who act freely. Reactive morality judges first and lives second. It asks, is this allowed? Is this acceptable? What will others think? The noble type asks something else entirely. Does this express who I am becoming? Nietzsche does not romanticize the noble type as flawless. He knows strength can become arrogance. Confidence can become blindness. But he insists that all great cultural achievements come from individuals who lived beyond approval. Artists, philosophers, explorers, innovators, these people were rarely moral heroes by their society's standards. They were often misunderstood, criticized, even hated. Yet without them, civilization would stagnate. Nietzsche argues that modern society increasingly rewards conformity. Systems become optimized for predictability. Difference is tolerated only when it is harmless. But real creativity is never harmless. It disrupts, it challenges, it refuses to fit neatly. This is why Nietzsche believes the noble type will always be rare. Most people do not want to create values, they want to inherit them. Creating values requires living with uncertainty. It means accepting that your choices may be wrong and owning them anyway. This is the burden of nobility, not dominance over others, but discipline over oneself. The noble person does not need enemies to feel strong. They do not need to degrade others to elevate themselves. They compete primarily with their former selves. Nietzsche sees this self-overcoming as the highest expression of the will to power. Power not as control, but as growth. Not as oppression, but as expansion. In this sense, the noble type is not defined by birth or class. It is defined by orientation. By how one relates to life. Do you respond or do you create? Nietzsche does not try to eliminate suffering, he tries to understand it. This alone sets him apart from most philosophies. Many moral systems view suffering as something to be avoided, minimized, or redeemed. Nietzsche sees suffering as unavoidable and potentially transformative. The question is not whether we suffer. The question is what we do with suffering. Nietzsche believes modern culture has become obsessed with comfort. Pain is treated as a failure. Discomfort is seen as a problem to be solved immediately, but growth, Nietzsche insists, does not happen without resistance. Strength is forged under pressure. Depth is formed through hardship. Character emerges from struggle. This does not mean suffering is good in itself. Pointless suffering remains pointless, but suffering that is given meaning becomes power. Nietzsche observes that people who endure hardship without interpretation often become bitter. They turn their pain into resentment. They seek someone to blame. In contrast, those who interpret suffering as a challenge often become stronger. They ask, What is this teaching me? How can this shape me? What can I become through this? Nietzsche does not offer consolation. He offers transformation. He rejects the idea that suffering should automatically make one virtuous. Suffering can just as easily shrink a person. What matters is not the amount of pain, but the response to it. This is why Nietzsche despises moral systems that glorify suffering for its own sake. He sees them as encouraging weakness rather than resilience. He also rejects pity as a moral ideal, not because compassion is wrong, but because pity often reinforces helplessness. It freezes people in their suffering instead of challenging them to rise above it. Nietzsche's vision is demanding. He asks us to imagine a life so fully affirmed that even suffering is accepted as part of its richness, not loved, not sought out, but integrated. This leads toward one of Nietzsche's most radical ideas, still unspoken at this point in the book, the idea that life should be lived in such a way that one could affirm it again and again. For now, Nietzsche prepares the reader by dismantling the belief that a meaningful life must be painless. Life is not gentle, and it is intense. And intensity, Nietzsche believes, is not something to escape, but something to meet with strength. Nietzsche looks at modern society and sees something troubling. Not collapse, but thinning. Life has become faster, louder, more efficient, yet somehow less deep. He observes a culture obsessed with productivity, usefulness, and immediate results. Everything must justify itself quickly. Everything must serve a function. But depth does not grow quickly. Depth requires slowness, reflection, silence, contradiction. Nietzsche believes modern culture discourages these qualities. Education trains people to specialize early, to master techniques, but not to think broadly. Knowledge increases and wisdom decays. The modern individual knows more than ever before, yet understands less. This produces a strange type of human being, informed, capable, and yet inwardly empty. Nietzsche calls this the danger of mediocrity elevated to norm. When everyone is encouraged to be similar, excellence appears suspicious. Originality looks disruptive. Greatness feels uncomfortable. So culture smooths itself out. It praises tolerance but avoids judgment. It celebrates diversity but fears difference. It values freedom but quietly punishes those who use it fully. Nietzsche does not blame individuals for this. He sees it as the result of systems. Systems reward what is predictable, what can be measured, what can be standardized. But human greatness does not follow formulas. The deepest thinkers often appear impractical. The most creative individuals often seem unproductive by ordinary standards. Nietzsche worries that modern culture no longer makes space for such people. He sees a world where entertainment replaces reflection, where opinions replace thinking, where noise replaces meaning. This is not a moral condemnation, it is a diagnosis. Nietzsche believes that when culture loses depth, individuals lose direction. They become restless. They seek stimulation instead of purpose. And in this restlessness, they become vulnerable. Vulnerable to ideologies that promise meaning without effort. Vulnerable to movements that offer belonging without individuality. Vulnerable to leaders who simplify reality into slogans. Nietzsche fears a future where culture becomes flat, not oppressive, but empty. A world without tyranny, but also without greatness. His response is not nostalgia. He does not want to return to the past, and he wants to cultivate new depths. Depth born not from tradition, but from conscious self-formation. This, Nietzsche believes, is the task of the future. Nietzsche does not see philosophy as an academic exercise. For him, philosophy is a way of living. A philosopher is not someone who argues cleverly. A philosopher is someone who experiments with existence. This is why Nietzsche distrusts purely theoretical thinkers. If a philosophy cannot be lived, it is incomplete. Nietzsche wants ideas that test the body, the emotions, the character. Ideas that demand something from the person who holds them. He believes every philosophy is an attempt to shape a type of human being. Christian philosophy shaped the obedient believer. Enlightenment philosophy shaped the rational citizen. Modern philosophy shapes the efficient specialist. Nietzsche asks, what kind of human being should the future cultivate? He rejects the idea of a final, perfect human. Humanity for Nietzsche is a process, not a destination. He famously writes that man is something that must be overcome. This does not mean destroyed. It means surpassed. Each generation, Nietzsche believes, should push beyond its inherited limitations. This requires courage, because overcoming oneself means letting go of comfort. It means questioning identities we cling to. Beliefs that once gave us stability may later become cages. Nietzsche sees philosophy as a hammer, not to destroy blindly, but to test idols. What we cannot question controls us. What we can question, we can transform. This is why Nietzsche writes aphoristically. Short, sharp statements that resist passive consumption. He does not want agreement, he wants engagement. A reader who argues with him is closer to his ideal than a reader who nods. Nietzsche believes the future philosopher will not seek followers, they will seek creators, people capable of taking responsibility for their lives, people strong enough to shape themselves without guarantees. This philosophy is not comforting. But Nietzsche does not apologize. He believes comfort has been overvalued, that humanity has grown cautious at the expense of vitality. His philosophy invites risk, not recklessness, but existential courage, to live without ultimate justification, to act without absolute certainty, to affirm life even when it offers no clear meaning. This, Nietzsche believes, is not despair, it is maturity. Nietzsche's idea of the will to power is often misunderstood. Many assume it means domination over others, control, and aggression, political power. Nietzsche means something far deeper and far more subtle. The will to power for Nietzsche is the fundamental drive of life itself, not the will to survive, not the will to pleasure, but the will to expand, to oppress, to become more. Every living thing, he argues, seeks not merely to preserve itself, but to overcome itself. Plants stretch toward light, animals test their strength, humans seek challenges, meaning, creation. Even self-denial, Nietzsche suggests, can be an expression of the will to power, power turned inward. When a person disciplines themselves, restrains desire, or follows strict moral rules, they are not escaping power. They are exercising it in a particular direction. This is why Nietzsche rejects moral systems that claim to eliminate power. Power cannot be eliminated, it can only be redirected. The question is not whether power exists, the question is how honestly it is expressed. Nietzsche believes many moral ideals hide power behind masks. Humility can be a way of controlling others through guilt. Selflessness can become a strategy for moral superiority. Obedience can be a demand for recognition. Nietzsche does not condemn these behaviors outright, he exposes them. He wants power to be acknowledged rather than disguised. When power is denied, it becomes toxic. It turns into resentment, manipulation, and cruelty disguised as virtue. When power is acknowledged, it can become creative. Art is will to power. Philosophy is will to power. Self-discipline is will to power. Self-overcoming is will to power. Even truth-seeking, Nietzsche argues, may be driven by the will to power, the desire to impose order on chaos. This does not make truth worthless. It makes it human. Nietzsche believes the healthiest individuals are those whose will to power flows outward without distortion. They do not need to dominate others because they are busy becoming themselves. They do not resent strength because they cultivate their own. They do not cling to moral absolutes because they trust their capacity to judge. This is why Nietzsche criticizes moral systems that suppress instinct entirely. Instinct is not the enemy. It is raw material. Instinct refined becomes character. Instinct disciplined becomes style. Instinct understood becomes wisdom. Nietzsche does not want humans to become beasts. He wants them to become artists of their own lives. And every artist needs energy. The will to power is that energy. Nietzsche repeatedly returns to one central danger, the herd. By the herd, he does not simply mean society. He means a way of thinking, a psychological posture. Herd thinking values safety over truth, consensus over insight, belonging over becoming. The herd asks, what do most people believe? What is acceptable? What keeps things sane? Nietzsche asks something else entirely. What is true to life? What strengthens? What creates? Herd morality, Nietzsche argues, emerges naturally. It is efficient, it reduces conflict, it allows large groups to coexist. But efficiency is not greatness. Herd morality teaches people to distrust their instincts, to measure themselves against averages, to avoid standing out too much in success or in failure. In this environment, excellence becomes awkward. Those who rise too high are accused of arrogance. Those who think too differently are labelled dangerous. Those who refuse moral simplicity are called immoral. Nietzsche does not deny that herd morality has value. It keeps societies functioning. It prevents chaos. But when herd morality becomes the only morality, culture stagnates. The herd does not create values, it preserves them. And preservation, Nietzsche reminds us, is not the same as life. Life grows, life risks, life experiments. The herd fears all three, and this fear expresses itself as moral outrage, as social pressure, as subtle punishment for non-conformity. Nietzsche believes many people internalize this pressure so deeply that they police themselves. They censor their thoughts before they are fully formed. They feel guilt not for doing wrong, but for being different. This is one of the most insidious effects of herd morality. It does not need force, it uses shame. Nietzsche's call to go beyond good and evil is, in part, a call to step outside this psychological trap, not to reject society entirely, but to stop allowing mass opinion to define personal value. The individual who moves beyond the herd does not despise it. They understand it. They recognize that most people need moral certainty to function. They simply refuse to mistake that need for truth. This refusal is lonely. Nietzsche never hides this. To think independently is to risk misunderstanding. To create values is to risk rejection. To live honestly is to risk conflict. But Nietzsche believes the alternative is worse. A life lived entirely within herd immorality may be safe, but it will never be deep. Nietzsche does not believe the future belongs to the masses. It belongs to a new type of thinker. He calls them philosophers of the future. These philosophers will not seek universal agreement. They will not offer final answers. They will not build closed systems. Instead, they will experiment. They will test values the way scientists test hypotheses, not in laboratories, but in life. The future philosopher, Nietzsche says, must possess rare qualities. Intellectual honesty, even when honesty is painful. Psychological insight, especially into themselves. Courage, not physical bravery, but existential courage. Most importantly, they must accept responsibility. When old values collapse, someone must decide what comes next. The future philosopher does not hide behind tradition. They do not appeal to God, nature, or history as justification. They say, "This is what I affirm." This is terrifying, because affirmation without external authority means total accountability. If your values are yours, you cannot blame anyone else for their consequences. Nietzsche believes most people are not ready for this burden. They want freedom, but not responsibility, choice, but not consequence, expression, but not judgment. The future philosopher accepts all of it. They know that creating values means risking failure. They know their experiments may collapse, and they know they may be misunderstood, even condemned. And yet they proceed. Nietzsche believes these individuals will not rule through force. They will influence through example. Their lives will demonstrate new possibilities of being human, not perfect lives, but intentional ones, lives shaped rather than inherited. This is why Nietzsche's philosophy cannot be reduced to slogans. It demands engagement. It demands that the reader decide how much truth they can tolerate, and how much responsibility they are willing to carry. Nietzsche does not promise salvation. He promises transformation. And transformation, he insists, is never comfortable. Nietzsche wants to change how you relate to your own life, not as a duty, not as a test, not as something to be endured until it ends, but as an experiment. An experiment has no guarantees, no promised outcome, no external judge waiting to grade the result. It demands curiosity instead of obedience. Nietzsche believes most people live defensively. They arrange their lives to avoid regret, shame, and uncertainty. They aim for safety rather than intensity. But safety, Nietzsche argues, slowly erodes vitality. A life lived only to avoid pain eventually avoids meaning. To live experimentally means accepting risk as unavoidable. It means choosing paths not because they are approved, but because they feel necessary for growth. Nietzsche does not suggest reckless abandon. An experiment is not chaos. It is deliberate engagement with the unknown. You try, you fail, you learn, you adjust. This approach transforms mistakes. Failure is no longer moral condemnation. It becomes information. Shame loses its grip. Nietzsche believes shame is one of the most powerful tools of herd morality. It keeps people small, predictable, controllable. To live experimentally is to loosen shame's hold, not by becoming shameless, but by becoming self-directed. When values come from within, external judgment loses its absolute power. Nietzsche's experimental life requires resilience, because when things go wrong, and they will, there is no higher authority to blame. This is why Nietzsche insists that not everyone should attempt this path. It is not democratic, it is not comforting, it is demanding. But for those capable of it, life gains a new quality: affirmation. Affirmation is not optimism. It is not pretending everything is good. It is the ability to say yes to life as it is, including its pain, uncertainty, and imperfection. Nietzsche believes affirmation is the highest achievement of strength. To affirm life without appeal to another world, without promised reward, without moral consolation, just this life, this moment, this struggle, and to say it is enough. Nietzsche introduces a phrase that quietly changes everything: amor fati, love of fate, not resignation, not acceptance out of weakness, but love. To love fate means embracing everything that has happened, and everything that will happen, as necessary, not because it is fair, not because it is just, but because it is yours. Most people tolerate their past, they forgive it, they endure it. Nietzsche asks for something far more radical. What if you could love your past, not selectively, but entirely? The mistakes, the losses, the suffering, the moments you wish you could erase. Nietzsche believes resentment poisons the soul more effectively than any external enemy. Resentment keeps you tied to what you hate. It gives the past power over the present. Amor fati breaks this chain. It says, "This too was necessary for me to become who I am." This does not justify cruelty. It does not excuse injustice. It transforms your relationship to inevitability. When you stop wishing reality were different, energy returns to the present. You no longer live in opposition to your own life. Nietzsche sees this as the final test of strength. Can you affirm not just the pleasant parts of existence, but the whole? Can you say yes without conditions? This is not a moral command, it is a personal challenge. Nietzsche does not expect everyone to pass it, but he believes those who do achieve a rare freedom. They are no longer haunted by if only. They no longer wait for redemption elsewhere. They stand firmly in their lives, grounded, unillusioned, and fully present. This love of fate prepares the reader for Nietzsche's final and most demanding thought, one that asks not just whether you can accept your life, but whether you could will it again. Nietzsche now brings the reader to the edge of his most demanding challenge, not a doctrine, not a belief, but a question. A question so heavy that it measures the weight of your soul. He asks you to imagine this. What if a moment came when you were told that your life, exactly as it has been lived, would have to be lived again? Not once more, not a few times, but eternally. Every joy, every mistake, every boredom, every heartbreak, every quiet afternoon and restless night. Nothing removed, nothing added, nothing improved. The same sequence, the same choices, the same consequences, again and again and again. Nietzsche does not present this as a theory of the universe. He presents it as a test. How would you respond? Would you collapse under the weight of it? Would you curse existence itself? Would you beg for escape? Or would you say it even once? Yes. This question, more than any moral rule, reveals how you relate to life. If the thought of eternal repetition feels unbearable, Nietzsche does not condemn you. He understands. Most people live in ways they tolerate rather than affirm. They survive rather than choose. Their lives are shaped more by avoidance than by intention. Nietzsche sees this as tragedy, not moral failure. The eternal question forces a confrontation, not with sin, not with guilt, but with authenticity. Are you living in a way you would be willing to repeat? If not, why not? What compromises have you accepted that slowly hollowed out meaning? What fears guided your decisions more than your values? What comforts replaced courage? Nietzsche does not demand perfection, he demands honesty. The eternal question is not about changing the past, it is about changing how you live now. Because if every moment carried infinite weight, you would choose differently. You would speak more carefully, love more fully, risk more honestly. You would stop postponing your life. Nietzsche believes this thought separates those who endure life from those who affirm it. Affirmation does not mean constant happiness. It means saying yes even to pain, because pain is woven into becoming. To affirm life eternally is to accept that existence has no final justification, no ultimate redemption, no external meaning, only the meaning you give it through how you live. This is why Nietzsche's philosophy feels heavy. It places the burden of meaning where it belongs, on the individual, and most people feel that weight immediately. Nietzsche does not expect the eternal question to be answered by everyone. In fact, he believes most people will recoil from it. And that is not an insult. It is an observation. Humanity, as it currently exists, is still learning how to bear freedom, still learning how to live without metaphysical safety nets. Nietzsche's philosophy is not for humanity as it is, but for humanity as it might become. He imagines a future human being shaped not by fear of punishment or hope of reward, but by self-respect. A person who does not need the promise of heaven to live well, who does not need moral surveillance to act responsibly, who does not need certainty to move forward. This future human does not ask, "What must I do?" but, "What kind of life can I stand behind?" Their values are not universal, they are personal, yet deeply, deeply serious. They understand that their way of living will not suit everyone, and they do not demand that it should. Nietzsche's vision is not utopian, it is selective. He believes culture advances not through mass agreement, but through exemplary individuals who live in such a way that new possibilities become visible, not through preaching, not through domination, but through presence. Their lives answer questions that arguments never could. They show that it is possible to live without resentment, without false comfort, without hatred of existence. They demonstrate a rare thing, the ability to say yes, yes to effort, yes to struggle, yes to imperfection, yes to becoming. Nietzsche does not claim this life is easy. He claims it is worth it, because a life affirmed is a life owned, not borrowed from tradition, not dictated by fear, not justified by illusion, but chosen. This is where beyond good and evil ultimately leads, not beyond morality into chaos, but beyond inherited morality into responsibility. Nietzsche does not close the book with a conclusion. He leaves the reader standing alone, with no commandments, no guarantees, no final answers, only a question echoing quietly beneath every page. Can you live in such a way that you would choose it again? As beyond good and evil nears its end, Nietzsche strips away the last comforts. No gods remain to forgive you, no absolute morals remain to excuse you, no final truths remain to hide behind. What remains is responsibility, not responsibility imposed from above, but responsibility that arises when illusion falls away. Nietzsche believes most people want to be told what to do because instruction relieves them of authorship. If rules exist independently of us, then failure sans is not fully ours. We can blame weakness, we can blame temptation, we can blame fate. But once you step beyond good and evil, blame loses its refuge. Your life becomes your statement. Every choice says something about what you value. Every compromise reveals a hierarchy of priorities. Every silence carries meaning. Nietzsche does not frame this as moral guilt. He frames it as existential clarity. You are always choosing, even when you think you are not. Choosing safety over growth, choosing comfort over truth, choosing belonging over integrity. None of these choices are sins, but they shape the kind of person you become. Nietzsche believes modern individuals often feel exhausted not because life is too hard, but because they live divided lives. They say one thing and desire another. They believe one thing and act against it. This division drains energy. When values are inherited rather than chosen, life becomes a performance, a role played for approval. Responsibility without illusion brings coherence. When you choose your values consciously, you stop wasting energy on justification. You stop pretending. Even suffering changes character. It becomes something you confront rather than something that happens to you. Nietzsche sees this as dignity, not moral dignity, but existential dignity. To live without excuses, without metaphysical insurance, and without resentment. This does not make life gentle. It makes it honest. Nietzsche never promises peace, but he offers alignment. And alignment, he believes, is a deeper form of strength. Nietzsche does not end beyond good and evil by telling you what to believe. That would betray everything he has argued. Instead, he leaves you with an invitation, not to follow him, not to agree with him, but to think dangerously and to question the values you inherited, to examine the morals you obey, to ask whether your truths serve life or merely protect you from it. Nietzsche knows this invitation will be rejected by most, and that is fine. He never wrote for everyone. He wrote for readers who feel an inner friction, who sense that obedience has limits, who suspect that comfort may be costing them something essential. For those readers, Beyond Good and Evil is not a guidebook. It is a disruption. It interrupts habits of thought. It unsettles moral certainty. It exposes hidden motives. And then it steps back. Nietzsche does not replace old idols with new ones. He breaks idols and walks away. What you do afterward is up to you. You may retreat to familiar beliefs. You may reinterpret Nietzsche safely. You may reject him entirely. All of these are choices. But if his words linger, if they return when you make decisions, if they whisper questions when certainty feels too easy, then the book has done its work. Nietzsche's final challenge is not philosophical, it is personal. Will you live as a reaction or as a creation? Will your values be inherited or authored? Will your life be something you endure or something you can affirm? There is no universal answer, only individual courage. And perhaps that is the most honest ending possible. No conclusion, no resolution, just a human being standing before their life, without illusion and choosing anyway.